Welcome back, everybody. This is Carolina Vi with All People's Health Collective and Disability Rights California. And we're on a continued path or continuing a series, if you will, on SB 258, yes, but also the implications of SB 258 for lots of different things and lots of different topics. And I'm just really excited to have Sarah here because for lots of reasons, but one of which we've already started this conversation offline. And we were just talking about it even before the podcast started recording. So, um, Sarah, can you share with the community of listeners here just who you are and what you're about?
Yeah, thank you so much, Carolina, for having me and for encouraging me to come on here, for having that confidence in me to be here and holding a space for me. I enjoy talking to you so much, Carolina. You make me feel really safe in conversation with you. So I'm glad I get to have this with you specifically here. So thank you for that. A little bit about my background. I was a high school English literature teacher for about 8 years. I was teaching in international schools mostly. I think this is important because it really shapes a lot of my views about the way that the systems around me function and what I have experience that works and doesn't work. But I lived in the Middle East. I lived in Abu Dhabi for a few years, and then I lived in Portugal for a couple of years. I lived in Vietnam, and then I studied in New York and London. And I'm from Chicago, so I live here in Chicago. My family is Syrian. I lived in Syria when I was really little for a while and used to go back and spend months there every summer. And so I think a lot of different cultures and different places that I've lived have really shaped the way that I view everything around me. After about 8 years of teaching, when I moved back to the States, I got my master's in public policy, and um, I ended up getting lucky and interviewing with Civil Rights Corps, which I love and I appreciate my role there. I'm an investigator. I started there about just over 2 years ago, investigating jails, sheriffs, judges, going to court and jails and trying to see what variations of abuse are happening from, you know, people in jails not being able or allowed to see their family and loved ones in person. There's like in-person visitation bans in many, if not most, jails across the country because they've been replaced with very expensive phone and video calls. And these very few companies are profiting billions from this. And so we would interview these families and the people who were incarcerated about what that's like. Because, of course, a lot of these people that are in the jails are parents and have kids on the outside that they're not seeing for months. To investigating judges who were closing the court, like we were looking in family court and looking at the way that judges will close the courtroom to anyone that's not directly involved in a case, um, basically like kicking us out. And that includes journalists, sometimes family members and loved ones of the people who are having their kids taken away by CPS. And we really wanted to challenge, the sort of like practice that judges are doing where they're, basically shielding themselves from any kind of accountability from the public. And it's really difficult to get records, transcripts, anything like that from these cases. So they're operating under um, a real wall that we can't access. And so CRC filed a lawsuit in Durham arguing this like First Amendment, that we have a First Amendment right to be there, and really hoping that that's like kind of like one way it's starting to chip away at this like very hidden family policing system that's harming hundreds of thousands of kids. And so, yeah, these last just over 2 years, I've been investigating for those cases, and that's really shaped a lot of it's helped me grow in a lot of different ways. I, as a teacher, really cared about these same issues, like these social justice issues, have always mattered a lot to me. Like I said, I'm Syrian, I'm Middle Eastern. I've grown up my entire life sort of with a very strong critical view on our like military industrial complex and sort of like seeing the way that like Democrats and Republicans alike do the same thing at the end of the day, to the Middle East anyway, right? Like that was very obvious to me. And so then that sort of that view has like grown even more informed as I've done the investigating in these cases too. Like when we look at various counties that one might say they're very progressive, one might seem very conservative, but actually they're doing the same thing in the jails and so on. So yeah, that's a little bit about me, or a lot about me, I guess.
Yeah, right on. A lot. And this is a lot of um, like our field is so, whether it's like schools or nonprofits, it's always, well, what's your specialization? Or I heard someone use the other word the other day, like monocrop, like what is the thing that you really focus on? And um, part of why we started APHC was because um, that idea of like silos or small stories is an illusion. All of this is so, the work that you do is so interconnected, everything from your work um, as a teacher and your work at Civil Rights Corps and now your involvement in APHC and your life experience too. And like I think those are all elements that we should talk about, you know. And I'm curious, like, for people to like have a little bit of context here, like what, and I know a little bit of the answer to this already, but to catch others up, like what was your interest in SB 258 and what excited you about looking at that issue and understanding that issue from all these different vantage points that you bring?
That's a great question. I didn't know much about it before joining APHC, this particular this specific fight. And I think it really quickly like connected me to this very strong opinion that I have about like, or I guess shock that I have that we allow our government slash like encourage our government and state to try to regulate so much of people's personal lives and have that power to determine the way that like people can function within their homes and in their very private relationships. And that's not to say that there aren't like issues in general, but who gets to say who can decide what happens in those situations? And I think it's really uniquely American that we um, allow the state to come in that way. And SB 258 does that, right? It pushes even more regulation. It makes like a determination of like who has what capacity to consent and like it's deciding it's yet another way that we're allowing the state to like criminalize very social, intimate behaviors and parts of our lives, which I find shocking. It's again, it is like uniquely an American thing. Obviously, like this happens a lot in other like I would say in the West the most, in some ways. But yeah, I think that's the factor of it that like really I was like, oh, yet another way, that we allow the government to try to regulate something that's very personal in our lives.
What do you mean by like it's a very American or Western concept or approach?
So I think I'll start with like Syria, for example, right? So like my family's Syrian. I grew up very in a very Syrian household, and I also li spent a lot of time in Syria. I have a lot of family there, and so I really grew up. And there's a lot of like a really large Syrian community here in Chicago that I grew up with also, and so I really got to see the way this like quite different culture handles these types of social problems, right? And the way that I witnessed it and experienced it, and I'll jump to in Syria, not even like Syrians here in the US, but in Syria, things like physical abuse in a family, within a family. If there's physical abuse within the family, whether it's spousal, parent child, between children, between neighbors, um, no one ever picks up the phone and calls the police. That just like doesn't happen. It doesn't, it's not even like that doesn't even come to someone's mind. What people turn to very instinctively, and I think it's like very much ingrained in the culture, is that you call someone else from the family or the whole family, and that's happened within my family, my extended family. Everyone sort of like gathers in the living room, and you sit and you talk about it, and it can be really, really difficult, really dark sometimes. There's yelling, there's whatever, but like it's handled there, and there are a lot of other people that are there to sort of like mediate and encourage resolution and conversation. And sometimes it's, like I said, like bringing in the grandparents, aunts, uncles, other siblings. Sometimes it is the neighbors. Sometimes it's the religious leader, like somebody that is respected in the community. And I would see this happen. Like I've seen like couples, like married couples who like were dealing with physical abuse in that relationship, and that is really serious. And we all agree that that's an issue, right? And we don't want that to happen, but um, it doesn't go to the police there. It doesn't. It's really rare. And if it does, like I don't even know how to imagine that. And I'm sure, like I have to acknowledge the fact that it's not like I lived my 30 something years in Syria. So like there's other stories there for sure, but I'll just speak to my experience and my family. And like I have a big family. My mom has 8 brothers and sisters. And so, there's a lot of people that I kind of base this like problem solving um type of way of doing things that sort of like changed the way that I see it. And I don't know, it feels much more like community based than anything. And then really it's kind of the same when I was living in Portugal. It also feels like very community. Everything is very much like resolved between people. There isn't this culture of like, I'm going to call the police. It doesn't, I don't know, this like instinct to call 911. Isn't really there. And Vietnam, even more so, is like really, really based in community. And, people live with their extended family. Sometimes, like often, like one building will be the whole family, and a lot of these like social problems that here in the US we hand off to the state, the police to take care of. It's just I haven't seen it. Like I don't want to say it doesn't exist over there. Of course it does. Like Syria just, overcame a dictatorship. So, there is very much like authoritarian power in a lot of these countries. But in these particular types of like issues in the household and between families, it's really different.
Yeah, I'm thinking about like how does that contrast with the cases and the situations that you've encountered in your work as an investigator for Civil Rights Corps?
I mean, one thing actually, is the family policing system here. I did not know, I won't say anything, but near nothing. I knew near nothing about the family policing system in this country until I started investigating at CRC. And um, I mean, it's like over 250,000 kids are removed from their homes every single year. And a lot of that is strangers, usually strangers, calling the police or calling CPS because they think something looks off about someone's family. And then strangers, from CPS coming to this person's home, removing the kid or kids, and taking those kids to other strangers, right? Like putting them in whatever building or foster care like home, or if lucky, another family member. And then more strangers, right? The judge, the guardian ad litem, whoever it is, talking about whether or not this kid should remain with the parents. And it's very much like a us versus them, like court versus parents situation. Whereas when I did some like more investigating, I was looking at how this is handled in other countries. And again, this is not a blanket statement. There are definitely issues in Europe with their version of child protective services taking kids away, especially from immigrant families. But um, I I remember like sitting in one of the when we were court watching in Durham, and I remember seeing one of the moms who was sitting up, at the front, whose child was taken away, and seeing the other court staff just sort of like talking all like like, oh, good morning, I just had my coffee, blah, blah, and they're like talking in this like very like oh, I don't even know, like this, just their very chipper way, as if they aren't completely devastating and traumatizing this woman and her family. And then, like, 10 minutes later, they start court and they talk about it, and she doesn't get to say a word. And I remember just thinking, like, wow, all these strangers that know nothing really about her, like, other than what's on paper, and um, aren't really like invested in her well-being or her kids' well-being. Like, at the end of the day, what happens to them doesn't really affect the judge. In fact, them being separated is part of the complex, right? Like of them keeping their jobs. Um, I think that again, that sort of like method of inviting strangers to decide what happens in people's lives is again like this sort of like very American way of doing things that I feel like again in a lot of other countries just doesn't. Like I was doing my master's I did a master's project in Ghana, and I was there for a few weeks, and I was doing some surveys of families. And this was before I started at Civil Rights Corps, so like it's kind of funny how things work. Like a lot of the stuff I was doing before I worked at CRC ended up really sort of like coming into play here. But I was talking with a lot of the parents at one of the schools that I was surveying at, and I was telling them about CPS. And this is before I even knew like really what happens here. And I was telling them, yeah, like sometimes kids are taken away from their parents. And the reaction I got from these parents, like, what do you mean they take kids away from their parents? Like, what do you like the absolute shock that I had, from the parents there, and it was a lot of there were a lot of parents there, like reminded me again that this isn't like the norm in a lot of other countries. So yeah.
You know, um, Part of the impetus for why we all came together um, and to why APHC was formed was because we were seeing this increase in the use of olds and 5150s here in California to um, expand the use of like these bureaucratic processes and policing of people and specifically poor people under the front of like psychiatric help and mental health support. And that was very clear in what Care Court was and some of the policies that followed. And then, of course, we've also now had this, um, greater attention and visibility around other forms of detention, specifically of immigrant families, which is not new, happened, like you pointed out, um, uh, not only just as much, but even more under previous Democratic administrations. And today is also being supported and funded and aided by, say, here in LA County, our local officials, our local elected officials. So it's a full on, um, uh, you know, uh, uh, kind of bipartisan effort to ultimately get rid of poor people. But what I when SB 258 was came on the radar for us at Disability Rights California and in All People's Health Collective, we talked to people that were actually living with intellectual and developmental disabilities about um, like what here what's this law actually going to play out like in your life, and so many of people with IDD said this is going to be this could be our own family members calling in law enforcement to regulate our relationships. Um, and the solutions we actually want are peer support, meaning people with IDD educating other people with IDD about sexual health and sexuality and sexual education. And, um, you know, in a way, and this is not to say that all family members are bad. That's not what I'm saying in this instance, but it was something that people, adults with IDD, were saying, like that we weren't necessarily prepared to have sex or healthy sexual relationships just like everybody else. And we need that support too. Um, and so in a way, like the work that you've done around family policing is very similar to what the impact of SB 258 will be as an example, as an additional example also of family policing. So um, just wanted to name that piece. And also, I think one of the things that you're pointing to is solutions and what do the solutions look like? And you spoke to the solutions that you've seen in your work and in your life. And um, I just want you to go like a little bit deeper there in terms of like other types of family situations that you have seen in your work at CRC, where maybe they're like, I don't want to like set up cases here, but I think it's really important to talk about that because the details of people's situations really matter in terms of the types of support they can call in or the types of support that don't exist, but they wish they could call in.
So I think one of the so when I was in Durham, I was conducting a lot of interviews with parents whose kids were taken away, like video interviews, and ended up putting that together in a video. And something that I think I remember asking in each interview was like, what do you need? Like, what is it that the court didn't give you that you needed? And I don't know if this is too it seems a little vague. It might seem too general, but I think it really is just like what they needed when they all kept saying things like, um, I just I mean, this is honestly like popping up in my head. It's really general, but this was just the response. It was just like I just wish that they would help me instead of take away my kids. Like if they are seeing that there isn't food in my fridge, help me put food in my fridge. If they're saying that I need to get a job, like help me to get the means to get a job. I need maybe a car to get to my job, or I need help because I don't know who can watch my kids, or I need a ride, or like it's like these like what seems like really not easy fixes, but like sort of easy fixes when the court is spending like, millions of dollars on taking kids away, those millions of dollars could easily fix a lot of those problems. But like I don't know if that's what you're asking me, but like that's or even when I was in Michigan, the families that were when we would talk to the families of the folks who were incarcerated, the problems that they were having were always like, I'm about to be evicted. I need help staying in my home and I don't know how to fight this like legally. Can someone help me? Or um, I'm not getting a law, the court's not giving me legal representation for my appeal. I need to appeal this. They took my kids, and actually this was in Michigan too. This man had his kids taken away. Um, and he was like, I don't know how to fight this. And they're not giving me a lawyer, and I don't have the means to pay for one. It's like these kind of like just bureaucratic in these cases a lot of times like bureaucratic like gatekeeping that like people who are dealing with these issues they like can't access, you know, they don't have the legal knowledge or experience or whatever, like certification even sometimes to do what they need to do. um or even just things like yeah, like housing and rides. Like there was one mother whose partner was imprisoned, and he was like over 2 hours away, and she has a 2-year-old daughter. And she was like, I want her to see him, but like I don't have a car. I don't have a way to get there. What can I do? You know, and she wants her daughter to have a relationship with her father. She really cares about that. So something like that, right? Like, and we ended up being able to connect her with, or I think I don't remember how it happened, but she was somehow connected with, um, some like organization or somebody who like does rides, like they help people get to these different jails and prisons that are far away from where we were, once a week or once every other week or something. So these are the types of things that would pop up, if that's what you're asking, I think.
Yeah, it is. And it also, um, like in the case of, I mean, I don't, in the case of, um, like, how do I put this? Like you, in instances, well, let's just say like in instances of, you know, I don't, it's so hard because we're developing a new vocabulary here together because all the words that have been used have been taken away from us and um, used inappropriately and misapplied. And so I constantly am struggling to find the right word for things. But I'm thinking about like there's that like those dimensions of wellness that you're talking about that actually do help people recover from um, violence and separation and estrangement and displacement. And then there's also situations where there needs to be repair of some kind. And um, you know, what are your thoughts about that? Because, and particularly in instances of like, you know, what we're talking about in APHC, like things that fall within the spectrum of like non-normative experiences or non-normative sex and sexuality. You know, you were an educator. You, I think, taught across all ages and developmental stages. What is your, what are your thoughts on that particular aspect of your work?
So I think, you know, carceral feminism was mentioned in the last couple of episodes, and I've been thinking a lot about that term and what that means. And I think once again, it really connects to this. So carceral feminism, I know it's come up before, but I don't even know if we've like defined it. It's like a strand of feminism, right, or policy advocacy that leans on police, prosecution, prisons as a primary solution to like resolve this gendered violence. So it really emphasizes, I think, like punishment. It's very punitive, um, and doesn't like you're talking about healing, right? That like that like the need for healing when there's harm that's done, whereas like this carceral feminism focuses on punishment and is very punitive and doesn't really help anybody at all. And I think is like when I was and I don't know if this is exactly what you are like asking, so I hope I'm going in the right direction that you were asking about. But like when I was a teacher, there were a lot of you know, I would teach like about 100 different kids every single year. That's a lot of people that I'm working very closely with, every single year, right? And as a teacher, you get to know your students very well. You get to know what they like, what they don't like, what, you know, ticks them off, what their passions are, their goals are, and what their struggles are, and what their personalities are like, and how they communicate or how struggle to communicate. And when you get to know that many people on a pretty like daily level, right? Like every day, and you're also trying to help them succeed. I learned that there isn't really like there isn't an easy way to decide what or there I mean and we shouldn't but like to decide what is like normal behavior and like I had students that were constantly really on a very deep level misunderstanding each other, and I as a teacher would like see this happen right before, like I would see it play out before my eyes, where I'd have like female students, for example, call this one guy a creep, right? And be like, he's such a creep. And they'd be talking about it like sometimes with me, like they'd be like in front of, a lot of like students would come and hang out between classes or after class, hang around or during group work. And so these conversations come up and they'd be like, oh my God, he's totally a creep. Or that teacher is like definitely a pedophile. Like throw these words around. And I would always come back and be like, well, hold on a second. Like let's first of all like understand the weight of the vocabulary that you're using there. And also, like, I happen to know that student that they're talking about, and I know that that student really struggles with communication, like what other people would call like normal, communication, or that student really struggles with eye contact and might give too much eye contact because he doesn't understand that that's not the way that others like will perceive as being normal. I had students with ADHD, with autism, and not everyone else knows that that person has like autism or has, struggles with communication or is dealing with trauma or like other types of um, like outside of school issues that are affecting the way that they can behave in school. So like there's all these things going on with this, person, the student, and these other students are interpreting that in such a, I think they're like attributing like a violent characteristic to that person when really that person has no intent of that. And I think about that a lot when we talk about carceral feminism because I would when I started to learn more about our prison system and who is in who's in a lot of our prisons, like the the fact that over 50% of people in prison suffer from some kind of like mental illness as well. And so I would and I don't know. It's a weird like kind of what you said about like using vocabulary. Like it's really hard sometimes to use certain vocabulary or like blanket statements that way. So I hope that that I do some kind of like fairness to talking about this. But I would think about how a lot of these students that I have in this class or in all my classes like as they get older and the way that they will interpret these things as adults when there isn't a teacher in the room to be like, well, hang on a second. Like, actually, I know that kid. He's a really nice kid. And like when he's like sitting there not looking at anyone, it's because he doesn't know how to communicate with others or doesn't like that sort of like mediation doesn't always exist. Um, and it's much easier to then, or even, we kind of talked about this before, but I think this is where this conversation gets difficult sometimes. Like that student that doesn't know how to interpret social behaviors, or even sometimes I had sometimes students like react in a seemingly violent way, like whether verbally or aggressively or pushing someone or whatever, because sometimes they're seeing someone else do it and they think that that's normal. And so they almost like mimic that behavior. Or um, like I would have students that would like drop, like would swear in the middle of class. Because they had seen other students do it and people laugh with that student. So he's like, "Oh, well, like people will like me because of that. Like if I do that thing, then, and that thing was acceptable by like the rest of my classmates, like that kid's the cool kid, and I do the same thing, like people will like me too, and that kid will do that thing and then everyone will be like, "What the like that was weird." Because it doesn't and I would see that kind of play out. And fast forward, I don't know, like 10, 20 years for that kid, like that, um, a lot of those behaviors can then, come out in different ways. And I think it's I don't know, I think when we talk about like putting people in prison for very um social social I don't know what the right way to put this, like social interactions and relationships, um, it doesn't get at the root of why these things are happening. And that includes, and I want to like preface this by saying like I take sexual violence very seriously, but I want to like recognize the complexity of it. And recognizing that complexity doesn't mean I'm trying to like excuse the harm or like explaining behaviors. It's also not the same as excusing it. But I really think that when we talk about sexual violence, sexual assault, um, the way that our courts handle that, the way our society wants to like take a person who is involved in that in any way and like sort of throw that person away, there isn't like there are other like that doesn't fix anything. There's going to be like that's going to keep on happening, you know? And yeah, I think that that's I'll leave it there for right now and hang on for a little bit.
Yeah, well, um, I just was thinking about what you were saying in terms of like, um, you talked about like the importance of understanding what are the kind of dimensions of wellness here that need to be that need to be addressed because people are saying they need help with something, right? And then you're talking about the importance and the value of mediation, whether that's through families or through schools. Um, but now we're like touching this like other topic that's so provocative for people around sexual violence, and the importance of what you said to me, not today explicitly, but when we were talking um, a couple weeks ago about social accountability and using that as like a framework for understanding these issues. And there's just, so much here to go with and talk about. Um, and I think maybe we should actually have you back, Sarah, to talk about that because this like corner of the world around sexual violence and social accountability is um, something that I would really like to dig into next.
Yeah, I think that it's again another way, like sort of coming back to where we started in the beginning, which is like it's another way that we've allowed our government, our state to intervene in very intimate parts of our lives. And again, like I'm not saying that these issues aren't very real, right? Like sexual violence, sexual assault, these issues are we need to talk about them and we want to talk about like how to prevent them and how to create healing from that. But I think that the reason sometimes people are okay with giving that to the court is that there's like this somehow like large belief in our society that the criminal justice system or injustice system is neutral. That it's fair, that if you didn't do anything wrong, that you'll be fine, you won't end up there. But like that's just obviously not true. Like history and data tell a completely different story. We know that, and especially with like rape and sexual assault cases. Like when and this is just like a random statistic that really stuck out for me when I was doing my master's, which is that when DNA exonerations, like for when DNA first started being used to help exonerate people, one of the largest types of cases, if not, I think it was the largest type of case that helped exonerate was sexual assault cases. And 60%, like that's a really, that's a large number there. And I think that in and of itself proves that the court is just like getting things wrong all the time. And it doesn't only matter in the situation of like you did it or not, right? We're not talking like this statistic was specifically from the Innocence Project, but like it doesn't matter. Like it's not just about innocence, it's the fact that the court just gets so many things wrong. It's not this sort of like totally neutral, we investigate, we figure out what's happened, and then like we give an appropriate punishment. It's never that simple, and every case and every story has so much to it. And I think people also like when they hear the word sexual assault, they hear the word rape, like they picture the most extreme version of that too. They picture the worst case scenario when in reality that's just not the truth. The majority of sexual assault and these types of cases are actually happening between people who know each other. It's not, people will imagine like a stranger in the street or somebody random that they don't know, like physically, and that does happen, but that is actually like significantly more rare than this happening between people who know each other. So then I think giving that once again to strangers who don't know those people at all to sort of take care of. It hasn't worked historically, and it's definitely not working now because we have the largest incarceration rate in the world, and we definitely are not in any way resolving or preventing all sorts of types of violence. So I think yeah, talking about this more. There's a lot to talk about. There's so many things, and yeah, so little time always.
Well, it's like I just for some reason I just like popped in my head here. You know, I remember, of course, like the like how it is that, and this is what happened in 258, which is that, Senator Wahab and Michelle Dauber and the backers of 258 conflated consent with capacity,
Mm.
and how like these big ex experiences um uh and like abilities, right? Experiences and abilities and um like rules of engagement, if you will, all get conflated, like capacity and consent and violence all get, people get like, wait, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about violence? Are we talking about consent? Are we talking about capacity? What are we talking about here? And like, I just remember like in the case of Monica Lewinsky, who was an adult when she had this, and this is a total tangent, and I'll leave it, for another time. But like, I just remember like she was an adult, she had a relationship, with the president at the time, and she, for the entire course of her, you know, public humiliation process, stuck to her truth about the fact that it was a consensual relationship, even though the media and the state and other, political interests constantly were trying to frame it as a non-consensual relationship. And I always really admired her for that. And her own kind of, voice in that experience, she would say like, this was not only a consensual relationship, but the people who actually committed the harm and the violence against me was not the person I was in this intimate relationship with. Say what you will about how you feel about it, whether it was a misuse of power, et cetera, et cetera, but it was actually the reaction and the intervention by the state that hurt me the most. And so I didn't mean to end this episode on talking about Monica Lewinsky, but it was actually a pretty formative experience for me personally in terms of understanding, um, you know, uh, the range of um, like experiences that I think actually a lot of people end up having at least once in their life, which is, you know, a situation, a sexual experience or interaction that, you know, has implications and is being gazed upon by others, right? And how do we make sense of that both individually, but also, when others are implicated, which I think is what you're speaking to. So awesome. All right, Sarah. Well, we're just scratching the surface. So um, I'm so appreciative that you came on today.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Take care.